Give this another moment for everyone to join, and we'll get started. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about HR Compliance Checkup, what every employer needs to know. Before we begin, we are happy to co-sponsor this event with the Massachusetts Council of Nonprofits, and we have Claire Ladd here today from MCN. She's going to just say a few words about MCN.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Innovo and Allyson and Tasha. We really appreciate you giving this webinar. Really appreciate you being an affiliate member of MCN. As you mentioned, my name is Claire Ladd. I'm the Programs and Services Manager at Massachusetts Council of Nonprofits. Just to give a little bit of background about us, our three goals are to strengthen the nonprofit sector through advocacy, public awareness, and capacity building services. These webinars that we offer regularly in partnership with our affiliate members are part of those capacity building efforts. Please stay tuned for future topics and let us know if there's any webinar topics you'd like to see. Our efforts are made possible by our more than 600 member organizations. So thank you to all of those of you who are members. And if you have not yet joined the network but would like to take advantage of benefits such as networking opportunities, trainings, cost savings, please visit macouncilofnonprofits.org/join to find out more, or just reach out to me anytime. And I'll just hand it back over to our presenters to keep going with our webinar.
Thank you, Claire. A little about us. So my name is Tasha Wilder. I'm a senior HR consultant here at Innovo, and I have joining me today our VP of HR, Allyson Hay, who's going to present with me as well. And before we jump in, just a little bit about Innovo. So we are an independently owned boutique benefits brokerage out of Concord, Massachusetts. So we work with our clients to create and manage competitive benefits package so that our clients can retain and attract top talent. We also offer fractional HR services, benefits administration services, and in-house COBRA. Our team may look small in this picture, but we are mighty. We are now the largest independently owned brokerage in Massachusetts, and we're going to be sending out this presentation. So, please click on those links and take a look at Innovo and some of our reviews and LinkedIn. A little housekeeping before we begin. So you may see a screen up in the corner. We do have an American Sign Language interpreter available for those who may need it. If you don't need the video, you can just hide that. So throughout the presentation, we'll have a few polls that we'll ask you to take. Those will pop up on the screen. We also have a Q&A feature that we're going to monitor during the presentation. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll take some of those questions. Again, we'll be sending out this presentation for you to have. And then at the end, we have a brief survey and then also SHRM and HRCI credits should you need those. All right, our first poll here. So this is going to pop up. Has your organization conducted a formal HR business practice audit in the last 2 years? Give folks a few moments. There's no right or wrong answers here. Those results are coming. Okay. We got a mix, so hopefully we'll have a little something for everyone here. All right, so we're going to cover, 9 core areas, and we're going to provide, some practical steps in each of these areas for you to review, some materials for you to gather, and high level, just, what are some areas that you can look into in these, 9 specific areas that, we see, the most risk or we see the most missteps, and how can you just do a quick checkup and quick fixes, or maybe some not quick fixes, but to ensure that compliance in those areas. We got another poll. How would you rate your organization's overall HR compliance readiness? Right. Again, a mix, and we get some very concerned. Hopefully, we'll help you out there. So why does it matter? So, like I said, we're going to cover those nine core areas, and you'll see in these slides, there's a lot of layers and there's a lot of nuances to each. So, just taking that time to do a quick checkup of these areas is really going to help you out. With the prevalence of remote work, the expansion to a multi-state workforce, there's a matrix of laws and policies that go state by state, some by municipality that just compound that risk. So just taking a look and taking some time. We're all so busy. Some of these areas can be overlooked, and I would say most of the time organizations are not, intentionally or maliciously breaking the law, or not complying with something or not providing something to employees. So just taking the time to look in these areas and do this checkup will really, save you some hassle in the end. All right, we got another poll. This is the last one. Which area of HR creates the most compliance concern for your organization out of those areas? Oh, okay. So employee relations, employee documentation, and record keeping, understandable. All right, so we're going to jump in. So we're going to start at the beginning here. So the onboarding process, bringing on a new employee. So what are some things that you'll need to review to gather? So, gathering your I-9 files, looking at your offer letters, what your COBRA process is, your personnel files, your labor law poster. So these are some of the things to think about to review, and then we'll jump into the next slide about some of those, what to look for and what's common mistakes. So, starting at the very, very beginning, starting with your offer letter. Are all of your key components in that offer letter? Did you provide the correct rate of pay? Is it spelled out hourly versus salary? If it's non-exempt versus exempt employee, did you include that rate of pay in the correct way? If there's contingencies in that offer letter, if there's contingencies to the offer, are they spelled out in that offer letter? The I-9 should always be a contingency. But if there's a background check or contingent on references, putting that in the offer letter to ensure that, one, the candidate knows, and two, if you need to rescind that offer, it's contingent in there. And then, if it is an hourly employee, did you include those overtime rules, payroll practices? And is that in there? If an employee is eligible for overtime, that's in there. What is the process if they need to work more than 40 hours in a week? And then also some states require a pay schedule to be listed in there, and also specific benefits and deductions. So looking at state by state, are you including that your pay is biweekly, your pay is weekly? So just reviewing that offer letter. Sometimes offer letters are created many years ago. You might have expanded to different states, so taking a look to make sure that those are still up to date. And then moving on, when someone comes on board, that I-9 process, we see a lot of mistakes in the I-9 process. And you've probably seen in the news, or just news alerts about the crackdown on I-9 and the completion of those. There's an increase in I-9 audits. And recently saw something that there's actually a bigger crackdown on those mistakes in those I-9s that were kind of previously overlooked. So not filling out a start date, a employee's address, just making sure that all of those fields are filled out properly on the employee side as well as the employer side. And making sure that you are completing that I-9 within 3 days of hire. And using E-Verify where it's required. So there are some states that you are required just blanketly to use E-Verify. But if you are if you're verifying I-9s remotely, if they're in a different state than you and your you know, viewing their documentation, through Zoom or Teams, e-verify is required. So just making sure those practices are in place for those I-9 files. And then your personnel files. So make sure, a lot of organizations, a lot of companies don't have those paper files anymore in those file cabinets. You may have those, whether physically or electronically. Just make sure, one, that they're stored securely or access to them is limited to only who needs to view those. That you're not, commingling every single thing into one employee file, that you're separating out, and looking through what really needs to be in that personnel file. Not putting, confidential medical information in that main personnel file. Making sure your I-9s are stored completely separate from the personnel file. Totally. It should have their own folder for their documentation, e-verify notices and such. And then looking at your federal, state, and local labor law posters. So this used to be, a big old poster in the kitchen or the break room, and you might still have that, but making sure, those are updated. It's not from 2022. And if you do have a multi-state workforce, making sure that you have those documents, those posters from each state. These, if you don't have that one location, these can be electronic. So making sure they're in a shared folder on the internet, that employees know where they are, and where they can view those. And making sure those are up to date as well. A lot of those change year to year. And another piece, so your COBRA notices. So we often think of COBRA at time of terminations, sending those notices, making sure that folks know how to continue their benefits. But you're also required to send out an initial notice when someone enrolls in your group health plan. So sending out or having that process for those initial notices, so that you're meeting that compliance piece as well. And then on top of those offer letters, some organizations have employee agreements, whether it's a non-compete, an NDA, some kind of other confidentiality. Just making sure you know the state laws. For instance, in California, there's a ban on non-competes. They're not legal and binding. Massachusetts has certain term limits. Some states have certain salary thresholds where you can have a non-compete. As well as NDA. There's specific pieces around release of claims, typically when it comes to termination, but also different states have different rules around NDA. So just making sure you're reviewing those agreements. Again, you have an offer letter template, you have an agreement, you've had it for years, you've added states, just making sure to take a look at all of these processes to make sure those are up to date. Wage and hour compliance. So this is, and you again probably see these alerts or news articles for claims and settlements, and this is where we do see the biggest compliance errors, or you hear about those biggest litigation cases. So what you'll need to pull, what you'll need to review. So getting a list of all of your employees, your titles, what their status is. Are they hourly? Are they salary? What are your overtime calculations? What are your final pay procedures? Do you have independent contractors? Getting a list of those and what those agreements and duties actually look like. And then your timesheet and time tracking process. So pulling all of that information so you can take a deeper dive. The first piece, and this is on the offer letter as well, taking a look at what the FLSA exemption is. So whether this person is classified as an exempt salaried employee or a non-exempt hourly employee under the FLSA, and also some specific state criteria. The threshold for salary may be higher in different states for what classifies as an exempt employee. So just looking at that piece as well. And when you're looking at an exempt versus non-exempt, so looking at the salary and duties test, with that duties test, holding the most weight. So based on their job duties, is this person a salaried employee or an hourly employee? And really looking at those duties. So if someone is coming on board, it's a good opportunity to take a look at that job description. Doing a whole audit of all roles as well. the safest bet under the FLSA is to have someone be hourly. So you won't get in hot water for having someone hourly. But take a look at your list. Do you have only one hourly employee or all of your employee salary? It might be a little hint to investigate. Not saying that they might not all be exempt, but it could just be tip you off to take a deeper dive into that. And then for those hourly employees, that overtime calculation. So, are you paying overtime at the correct rate? 1.5 times salary, typically on a work week over 40. Again, different states have different overtime rules. So, for instance, California, anything over 8 hours is considered overtime. So, if you do have those California folks looking at that, that you've not had a blanket OT calculation. Also looking at in your policy, what counts as hours worked over 40? Your sick, your vacation, do those count as hours worked or not towards that overtime calculation? I would say typically no, but I have seen it. So check your policy to make sure that you're paying that correctly. And then also, if you have shift differentials, non-discretionary bonuses, are you including that or your system in the calculation of OT? You probably have a payroll system or a payroll provider, just doing those checks just in case. And, for those hourly employees, that timekeeping. So how are you tracking employees' time? You may have a punch in, punch out timekeeping electronic system. You may be doing it by Excel spreadsheet or paper spreadsheet. In either case, making sure that employees are filling that out each week or each pay period, that they are getting paid and putting down the hours that they actually worked. If you do have a timekeeping system, is it set to the exact minute? Are you rounding up? Are you rounding down? Based on, there's a 7-minute rule if you're doing the rounding, close to the closest quarter hour there. So just checking your timekeeping and making sure it's consistent for each employee, and that also those rules are meeting that compliance piece. And then another one that we see a lot is auto docking someone's pay or taking out their lunch break. So you have a 30-minute unpaid lunch break, and every day you are just deducting that 30 minutes. You're assuming that person is taking a lunch. But if they work through their lunch or if they have to attend a meeting, they need to be paid for that time. So just taking a look at that timekeeping system, making sure meal and rest breaks, and making sure really that every hour an hourly employee, all the time that they are working is on that timesheet and that they are paid for. And final pay procedures. So, another wage and hour mistake we see a lot. There are different final pay rules for different states. For instance, Massachusetts, for an involuntary termination, employees who have an involuntary termination must be paid out that day with their all time that is owed that they've worked, with all time that is accrued PTO. And that has to be given to them on that day. Different states have different rules, like I said. In Massachusetts, if you don't pay on that day, you could be liable for treble damages. That's 3 times damages and their attorney fees. So it's really important to review those final pay procedures and build that into your timeline if it's an involuntary termination. And then the other piece we talked about, so independent contractors. So this is really sticky and it's nuanced and it's layered. If you do have independent contractors, pull that list, pull their duties, pull their agreements, and just ensure that they are truly independent contractors. If you research it, there's many different testing. So there's the IRS, independent contractor, Department of Labor. Many different states have very strict independent contractor rules. So California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Illinois. Many states follow the ABC test, which is the strictest one. And so that's, looking at, is the worker free from control and direction of the organization? Is work performed outside the usual course of business? Is the worker engaged in something independent outside of the role that the organization has, independently established trade or occupation? So looking at those, looking at all of the different tests to ensure this person is truly an independent contractor and that they shouldn't be on your payroll, eligible for benefits, and just that they're classified in the right way. Our next topic here. So recruitment and hiring. Again, another one that can, get you into some trouble. Interviews, many different candidates, many different people part of that recruiting process can get like sticky. So, things you're going to want to look at: your job posting, your application materials. What is your background check process? Or your application materials, applicant tracking records if you have those, AI usage, how are you using that, what information is gathered during that application process, and who's part of that recruiting process. So starting with your job posting. So making sure that that contains all the required information. Of course, what the job is, the duties, the schedule, your experience, but also there's another layer of pay transparency laws. So you might have to include a salary range in your job postings. In Massachusetts, if you have 25 or more employees, you have to disclose a good faith salary range. Some states also require the range and a list of benefits offered. So just looking at, where you have employees, where you're going to be posting this, and, making sure you're meeting all of those requirements in that posting. And looking at, how you're collecting that information. Is this through an ATS that you're consistently capturing the same information? Do you have, maybe you have physical paper applications? Check to see if those are outdated. I've seen some that are, require social security number, date of birth. It requires you to list all your jobs and your rates of your leaving rate of pay at that job. All of those are prohibited. And with pay transparency laws, also, even outside of the application process, you can't inquire into what a previous salary is. So taking a look at how that information is collected, make sure it's consistent for all applicants, and that the information is legal. In the recruiting process, so I said this, you can kind of get yourself into trouble here. You might have some untrained folks who are, just interviewing for the first time, which is great. We want to include them if they're part of the team. But, you never know what a candidate is going to say, what a candidate is going to disclose, or, the employee may not know what are legal and non-legal questions to ask. So make sure that there is, a process for training or providing information to those who are on the interview team, what they can ask, what they can legally and not legally ask. If someone, a candidate brings up something that's, based on a protected class, how to steer the conversation, away from that, or to let them know that's not part of the decision-making process. And then also to be mindful of what you're writing in your interview notes. It should relate to the experience, this person's experience, how it relates to the role. Not writing down things about protected class or, opinion on things that are not related to the role, and making sure if those are kept, that they're kept separate also from employee files. In addition to, the actual legality of questions, you're going to want to make sure your process is consistent for each role. This may look different for different roles, but there should be a list of questions, a consistent interview team. You're going to hear me and Allyson say consistent, 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 keep saying that, but it really is, consistency is key in certainly the recruitment and hiring process in a lot of these processes. And AI. So AI can be a wonderful tool, and you may be using it to source and vet candidates. It might be embedded in your ATS or how you're reviewing resumes and applications. There are new laws popping up about, usage and how you can use, and we will certainly see more of those. One piece now is disclosing to candidates if you use AI in the recruitment process. This is state by state now. Best practice also. And then if you are using an AI note taker in Zoom or Teams, to be sure to disclose and receive consent for that. And at the offer stage, so we talked a little bit about the background check process and the contingencies in the offer letter. But once you're at that stage, so if you want to ensure if a background check is being run, that is going to be included as a contingency. The Fair Credit Reporting Act has specific requirements on disclosure and authorization. So you want to make sure that if you have a system, that it typically, if you have a system like Checker, they're going to be sending out those authorizations and disclosures. But if you have kind of a one-off, that you're sending out those FCRA requirements and notices. Okay, our performance management. So things you want to look at. So templates and documents used in the performance review process. What is your process for merit increases and bonuses? Documentation for progressive discipline. Criteria used for progressive discipline, promotions, job changes. So, in the review process, so this is, thinking about review in that annual cycle or, performance when things don't go so great and you have to move to a performance improvement plan or discipline. So, whether you have a quick quarterly questionnaire or a longer annual review doc, again, the consistency is key. Your organization is not going to look your process is not going to look completely the same. Your managers may have different relevant questions than individual contributors, but the general purpose should be the same: to gather feedback, set goals, discuss career goals, and it's all documented in the same way, so that that employee also has something to look to for their goals. And then when you're looking at performance tied to merit, tied to bonus or promotion, is there a process that is linked to that? Do you have is there a correlation between that review and that bonus? You have a glowing review from the manager, but that their performance is not great. And so, you give them, maybe you have a rating system, they get all fives, but they only get a 2% increase. You have another employee who gets all fives, but they get a 8% increase. What is the criteria? And making sure to go back to that manager to say, we know that this employee doesn't have, has been having some performance issues. We need this to match what the performance is so that you can have that documented. And again, same with promotions. Is there a clear criteria into how someone gets promoted? Is there certain skills, trainings, things that need to be obtained before someone can get a promotion? On its face, can be perceived that it's not job related. It can be perceived that it's, related to something discriminatory. So just having that criteria mapped out and that there is a structure to it, can prevent that perception. And then, when it comes to the other side, so the progressive discipline piece. So, we know ourselves, our managers come to us, they're at their wits' end, they want to move to termination, but we know, we have to document this. So making sure that, again, consistency, that we're documenting these performance improvement plans, corrective actions, your warnings, that you have a template for these and that they provide that information to the employee on how they need, what they've done, or if it's a performance improvement plan, how they need to improve, and that there's a process where the manager has place in that as well to continue to follow up with that employee, to document, those meetings and that communication, where they're meeting goals and where they're falling short, so that you have that documentation if things move to a termination. Right, leave management. So this is again a very nuanced area. Each case is a different a different situation, a different issue. It has, different protections and many different layers can apply. Again, that consistency in process. The process itself should be consistent. While the leave may fall under different areas, that process is going to be the same for each employee. So pulling, your FMLA certifications, any ADA documentation, your PTO policies, tracking spreadsheets, how are your benefits, your premiums paid? If you're an FMLA eligible employer, so typically 50 plus employees, there's more detailed nuance to that, but 50 plus, you have to follow that FMLA compliance. So providing the leave, the job protection, benefits continuation, job restoration, but you're also providing the correct compliance notices and certifications. So looking through to ensure you have all of those forms that you need to send out, but also a process for sending those, tracking those, and that again consistently across for all employees who are taking a leave, whether they're eligible or not. There's approvals and denials. And then, this other layer of the different state and municipality leave laws. So again, there are more states popping up with paid family leave. And, if you have an employee who lives in a state with paid family leave, you want to ensure if they're taking leave that, one, that they are, set up properly in that state, but then also that they have that information. It is on the employer to, communicate and, through posters and through communication that their state has a leave program and that you're following the most generous protection. So Massachusetts, for instance, has a robust paid family leave program, has wage replacements. Their time frames exceed FMLA, so that you have to understand that those protections and that you're applying those accordingly if someone's taking a leave. Looking at your PTO policies and making sure you're not denying someone the usage of PTO or requiring them to use it in certain states, Massachusetts being one of them. You can't deny someone their use of PTO while on leave or require them to use it. It's their PTO to use how they want on their leave. And also that checking your policies to ensure if someone is eligible to accrue PTO while on leave and that you're applying that consistently as well to all of those folks that are on leave. And don't forget to add to it the ADA process. If someone is requesting accommodation or the need for an accommodation, you are on notice to then engage in that interactive process. So if you have an ADA process, do your managers know what to look out for or when to reach out to HR? And do you have all of those forms and engaging in that interactive process? And then the last piece on here are the benefits premium collection. So we get a lot of questions on this is, how do we collect premiums for folks who are on leave that may not be getting a paycheck through their regular pay? There's not one compliant way to collect pay, but again, that consistency. So, if you can have them, cut a check each month, you can deduct it retroactively when they get back. Are they required to provide a lump sum before they leave? You as an organization can decide on what that timing looks like, but it's just making sure that you're treating that payment repayment the same for all employees on leave. All right, enough from me. I'm going to pass it over to Allyson.
Great. Thank you, Tasha. And I think what you're going to find is that I'm going to be actually repeating much of what Tasha said as well, because these are all so closely linked to each other. So the next area of compliance is compensation practices. So pulling a list of employees, all the demographic information, pay, date of hire, experience. What experience did they bring to the organization? How many years of experience specific to that position? What is their tenure with your organization? So it's going to be a bulky spreadsheet. Additionally, you're going to pull whatever your salary bands or ranges are. What's your progression criteria? What is the information you use to make salary changes and determinations? Also pulling any policies, procedures, how you are actually handling incentive and bonus plans and commissions and any additional types of compensation. And then also, what are those compensation decisions for documented performance data? As Tasha mentioned, making sure that there's consistencies, that what's in your performance review, if that's linked to increases or bonuses, that they match and that they make sense. So on the next slide, we'll get into specifics about what to look for. So conducting a periodic pay equity analysis, and you're going to be using that spreadsheet to look at across gender, race, and tenure, what positions are getting paid and if it's consistent based upon their experience, their performance reviews, and the position. So you're going to be looking at all that information. You may find inconsistencies, and that's okay. That's the whole purpose of that equity analysis. You're also going to be looking at what your salary bands are, your ranges, and your progression. Every organization may take a different philosophy for compensation. There are organizations that are laggers. They want to be behind on salary because they offer a robust benefit package. Or there may be some who are like, they just want to be right in the middle with the pack with their competitors. Or there's some that are like, we're going to lead and we're going to be leading in our compensation, and our benefits are going to be leading or they're going to be lagging, depending on what it is. But so it's important to note that because that's important when you're doing your recruiting to know what your organization is doing from a compensation standpoint. Reviewing your incentive and bonus plans to make sure that they're clear, to make sure that there's a specific process. If it's a finger in the air, as I like to call it, I think this person should get this much. That's really hard to defend if someone says, I think you unfairly gave me this bonus because of, A, B, or C, which could fall into a protected class. So making sure you have a very specific policy for bonuses. Is it based upon how the company does from a revenue standpoint or a success standpoint? Is it based upon you meeting your goals or meeting specific goals criteria for your specific job? So what specifically does that person need to do to be able to get that discretionary bonus? And the ERISA risk falls under retirement deferred compensation plans, which may be types of bonuses. So if you have any of those, making sure that you're digging deep into make sure that there's no compliance issues there as well. And then we said this, I think, at the beginning, Tasha said it, but it's really important to say it again, making sure those compensation decisions have documented performance data. So if you're linking your increases to performance and those performance evaluations, then they need to follow suit. And it's sometimes really tough for managers to be thoughtful and considerate and critical on those performance reviews. So if they're giving all meets expectations or above expectations, but they're not getting a large bonus or a considerable bonus or a considerable increase, it doesn't match. There's an issue there. And then finally, for compensation, make sure that you're adhering to state and municipal pay transparency and reporting obligations. Again, we talked about this before. There are pay transparency requirements that are specific to specific states. Just be careful when you're recruiting, if you're recruiting across a geographic area or the person can be anywhere now with remote work, that you're meeting those pay transparency requirements. The other piece, which I think also Tasha mentioned, is making sure you're reporting obligations to the employee. So if, for instance, from a compensation standpoint, there's certain states that require that you tell the person how they're getting paid, when they're getting paid, what the cadence of that is. There are certain states that require weekly pay versus biweekly versus bi-monthly or by twice a month. So making sure that those obligations and those reporting requirements are being met. Common mistakes. Setting pay based on prior salary in jurisdictions that prohibit that. And again, Tasha mentioned it, we can't ask what someone made previously, so we shouldn't be making salary decisions based upon that. We should be looking at specifically what their experience is and how they should be placed on that salary range based upon that experience. Having no structure, using the finger in the air to decide what someone should be paid. Pay gaps that aren't analyzed. So, could be two people with similar positions. They don't have to have the same job title. They can just have similar positions. And if they are drastically different and they have similar experience, similar performance reviews, similar increases, why are they so different? So, making sure that you're looking at those gaps. Um, and out-of-date postings. Again, can't say it enough. You are required to make sure you have wage and hour postings for most states and federal requirements. So make sure that those are either being provided to your remote employees or are posted in your break room or near the time clock machine. All right, training. So training requirements. Sometimes we think as training is just a nice to have, but there are specific requirements specific to training. So pulling those training logs by state, um, documentation, the cadence, what employees have done them, when was the last time they did them, looking at your OSHA logs that are specific to training is there training on SDS or things like that that you have sign-offs on. System documentation. What are you using to track those trainings and how are you making sure people have completed them in a timely manner? Manager trainings. Again, Tasha mentioned this. How are you tracking? How are you documenting that your managers have been trained so they know how to do recruiting properly, ask those questions that are not illegal, that they know that they need to that an employee needs to be offered a leave if they disclose that they have an issue or concern that they need to have time away for their own serious health condition or a family member's. So how are you documenting that? So pulling that all together. And what you're going to be looking for is making sure that you're tracking these trainings. There are a number of different states, Connecticut, New York, California, Illinois, just to name a few, that require preventing harassment training. And there's a different requirement for managers versus employees. So making sure that you have documentation that that has been completed and it is state specific and meets the requirements of that state. Each state is a little bit different how you meet those requirements. So making sure that you have it is specific to the state of the requirement. Also the cadence, how often you have to do that training differs based on the state. So making sure that you're looking at what states your employees are and you're making sure you're meeting those training requirements. OSHA, role-specific safety training logs. This can be industry specific. It could be something like forklift training if you have more of a warehouse type setting. It could be bloodborne pathogen if you have more of a healthcare setting. It could be food safety if you have more of a food service type industry. So really digging in to make sure that whatever the requirements of your industry is, that you're meeting those training obligations. And then documenting that manager training, as I said before, making sure that you are giving them the tools to know when they need to refer an employee to HR and let HR know that someone may need a leave or may need an accommodation. And making sure that they know, oh, hey, this could be a discipline issue. Maybe we should be documenting this and asking how to do that in the correct way. Refresh content as laws change. They're always changing. You got to be on top of that. It's really challenging. We do send out, we have for our clients Xywave, which they're sending out updates through that. Your attorneys you may use, maybe sending those out, but making sure you're sending those out and you're staying up to date with those trainings. So for instance, California now requires a workplace violence prevention plan and training. So, and that has to happen annually. So making sure that you're always adding and layering on those additional requirements. And then using a system to be able to track that, as I said before. The thing to remember is whatever online videos you are using, making sure that they're compliant and they're interactive. There's nothing worse than sitting through a training video that just is not engaging, not requiring the employees to be engaged throughout that process. So making sure that you're taking that training first to make sure it's the right training for your staff. Skipping supervisor-specific modules, as I mentioned, the preventing harassment. There's many states that require a 2-hour training for those employees versus just a regular line staff employee. Um, and then process to retrain. So somebody's promoted to manager. How do you make sure that they then are getting trained on that 2-hour manager training for preventing harassment, or make sure that they're being trained on how to do interviewing for your organization. So having a process in place for those types of things. All right, our last compliance area. Second to last? Second to last. Safety and risk management. So OSHA and 300 logs. Not every organization is required to do an OSHA 300 log, but there are many that are. So if you go to the OSHA website, you can check. So if you are required, you need to make sure that you have those logs. You have the annual 300A posting that happens from February 1st through April 30th. That's posted in site in your organization. So usually like the break room or near the time clock where your other postings are. There are also some organizations that are required to submit that to OSHA as well. So make sure that you take a look at that. Incident reports, investigation, and corrective action. So any accident and incident reports, pulling those, how are those documented? Are they getting filled out? What are your return to work or modified duty processes? What are your policies regarding remote hybrid work or ergonomic requests or workplace violence prevention policies? And then finally, any industry-specific emergency plans. So once you have those all pulled together, you're going to look through them, make sure that your 300 logs are being completed timely. You know, I've seen so many occasions when we wait until the end of the year and we're fast trying to enter those information. Usually it's piecemeal. We might have incorrect information. So making sure that as those incidents and accidents are happening, you're filling out your logs to make sure that it's accurate. Making sure that you're documenting every incident and accident. Somebody cuts themselves, but they don't go to the doctor. Somebody falls and they say, oh, I'm fine. Make sure they fill out an incident report that day. That information's fresh. You can make sure that you know who was a witness to that accident or incident. 3 weeks later, when they're saying, hey, my back's still hurting from that fall, and you have to now fill out the incident report for the first time, that information is not going to be as accurate. So make sure those policies are in place to be able to fill those out right when they happen. Reviewing your return to work in your modified duty process, make sure that's in accordance with the ADA, but the sooner you can get that employee back to work, the better. That is going to shorten your workers' compensation claim. So you want to have processes in place to be able to get that employee back to work as quickly as you can. Making sure that you have these workplace violence prevention trainings, the emergency preparedness trainings, all available. You have those processes and plans in place, and that you've trained staff so they know what they are. So when it does occur, everyone's not confused and doesn't know what it is. And then industry-specific training. This, again, can be specific to certain safety. It can be ISO. It can be forklift training if it's a warehouse. So again, making sure you know what trainings are required based upon your industry. And then making sure that you have your posting for your workers' compensation company, and then also designating a facility where employees can go if there is an accident or injury. And that's important because those are usually occupational health providers, and they're more apt to know specifically how to deal with workers' compensation claims, and they can work directly with you, the employer. The employee can always choose to go to their own doctor as well, but if they sometimes don't know, I always recommend sending them to the occupational health provider. The other thing that I'll say about common mistakes is sometimes we forget if there are a prominent number of claims or cases, workers' compensation cases, or if there's even incidents that are not reportable, but they're happening often. We need to take a look at those and we need to say, what could we have done to prevent those? And that is a big common mistake. And if it's a lot of recurrences, having a safety committee, having a group of people determine how can we really effectively change these incidents from happening in the future. And then I think this is our final group of compliance items, which is multi-state and municipality considerations. So again, pulling that list of employees by state, by city, including your remote employees, looking at what handbook addenda you have for those specific states, making sure that those have been acknowledged by employees, looking at state and municipal paid leave, time off, new hire termination notices that you have, looking at state-specific employment practices such as reimbursements, remote stipends, final pay, pulling that all together, and then confirmation of that you have the employment tax withholding and employment by each state also happening in your payroll side. What to look for. Making sure you have people categorized for where they live correctly. So if, for instance, you are based in Massachusetts, you have an employee in New Hampshire, they're working 3 days a week at home in New Hampshire, 2 days a week in Massachusetts, they're primarily in New Hampshire, they should be classified as a New Hampshire employee. So making sure that you are classifying those remote employees correctly. And then you're meeting all the state requirements specific to that. Making sure that if an employee moves to a new state, that you are then following those requirements and you have those new addenda. You also may want a policy in your handbook that if someone is moving to a new state, you have to approve that before you allow them to work from that state. It prevents you from an employee moving to Hawaii where you have to get a whole different benefit structure in place, for instance. So making sure that you have that requirement from employees. New hire termination documents, final pay is aligned with state law. Tasha mentioned this before, but there are requirements. Like in state of Massachusetts, you have to give an unemployment notice. There's many states that do require that. So making sure that you have that information ready for each state you have employees in. State law reimbursement and remote stipend policies. This is a neat one to remind people of. For instance, the state of Massachusetts just says that if you have any work-related expenses, you need to be reimbursed for those. But there are states like California that require you to reimburse a portion of the person's internet if they're using it for their home office and reimburse their part of their cell phone bill for if they're using it for work. So make sure that you're taking a look at what those policies are for those states you have employees in. And then registering for unemployment tax withholding, unemployment, and I would also say any state disability or state paid leave. That can sometimes happen when an employee moves and they haven't had that set up. They can be missing those deductions. So make sure that you're taking a close look at that. And the mistakes I think I've covered in the first part. We're running out of some time, so I want to make sure that we get to the next piece, which is our survey, and also to promote the Massachusetts Nonprofit Excellence Awards. So Tasha, I think you have to launch the survey, which is the last poll. So just a reminder, Massachusetts Council of Nonprofits is a great organization. I can let Claire actually maybe share just a minute to talk about the Excellence Awards, which are happening on June 17th. Inova will be there. We'll have a table set up, so please come say hello. Introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you in person. Tasha will be there as well.
Thank you.